Hello, my name's Matt Johnson, and this is going to be what I hope is a bit of an update on the workings and thinkings of the UK. There's an old Chinese saying, may you live in interesting times, and we the world over certainly are, but perhaps nowhere more so than right here in the United Kingdom, where we haven't been a kingdom for nearly 70 years and haven't been united for about 4, and that's about as long as we voted for Brexit. So let's start there. People were given a choice to stay member of our closest and largest trading bloc, which is right on our doorstep, or to plunge our metaphorical punts into the English Channel and push on for the promised land. The result shocked everybody and drove a wedge between the Leavers and Remainers. And what followed was 4 years worth of fairly bitter infighting, a form of civil war, if you like, between the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. A little bit of a Civil War joke there. And while it was clear Brexit had won, nobody was quite clear what that meant. Leaving the EU, sure, but Canada model, Norway model, American pole dancing model? It wasn't clear on the ballot, and the British people were confused. But that was okay, because that's what the MPs, members of Parliament, are for. Unfortunately, the MPs represented the people, so they were confused as well. And David Cameron said, hey, I know what I'll do. And somebody said, what? Get some ideas as to why people voted leave, and maybe have a look and try and put it right. And David Cameron said, no, I'm going to do this. And he left. But at least we had a new PM. And she said, hey, I know what I'm going to do. And everybody said, what? Have another referendum to get some clarity on what leaving the EU might actually look like. And she said, no, let's have an election. So we did. She was a pro-EU leader that was now leading an anti-EU party to leave the EU. And on the opposite side, the opposition was headed by an anti-EU leader who is now leading a pro-EU party in also trying to leave the EU. Got it? Good. So we had the election and the Conservatives won and Labour lost. And all the Labour supporters went, hooray! Because they didn't really understand how elections worked. And we had Theresa May as PM. But then she made Boris Johnson, who seemed like a bit of a laugh, Foreign Secretary. And he said, wow, Secretary, I'm going to wear some tight skirt, some saucy stockings. I had to explain to him that it wasn't that sort of secretary. And the PM went, right, enough faffing, which is a British word for ambling around aimlessly with no discernible sense of direction. And believe me when I say that if you want to keep up with British politics, you're going to need to make a note of that word, faffing. She said, enough faffing, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over to the EU myself and I'm going to get a deal. Because everybody she sent over either forgot the paperwork or got lost at Dover. So she got the deal, she brought back the deal and turned around to Parliament and said, there you go, here's the deal, can everybody sign it so we can move on? And the MP said, hang on, are we sure this is what the British people want? After all, this doesn't look like what we promised the British people by painting it on the double-decker. And the PM said, for fuck's sake, this is a deal. I've worked my skinny arse off on this fucker. You're going to sign it or what? The MP said no, and the British people said no. And for the first time since the referendum, the people and the MPs were united in believing that she was a stone-faced bitch. While all this was going on, Boris Johnson, who had been Foreign Secretary, which is sort of like making Danny DeVito point guard for the New York Knicks, had left that job and was offered the chance to write a column for the Daily Telegraph. He said, hey, I've got the largest column in Westminster. And everybody said, yeah, put it away, Boris. Anyway, this job meant that he could write about the PM and heckle her and get a few laughs saying things like, I wouldn't have done it like this, I would have done it like that, or like the other, etc., etc. Until the point, Theresa May just went, fuck it, go on then, do it yourself, I'm off. And she left. And Boris Johnson went, ah, shit, as he realised they were going to give the job to him, which they did. Now, Boris Johnson has obviously been the main character in all this, from campaigning for leave in the referendum, to Foreign Secretary, to writing about stuff. Ever since he was little, Boris only ever wanted one thing, to be king of the world. He liked that title because it meant that he could be loved and adored wherever he went. Also, kings didn't do any work, which suited him just fine, as Boris was a bit lazy and didn't like being bothered with things like details. So he had a great idea. He got the deal that Theresa May had, scrubbed out her name and put his own at the top. And everybody that hated May's deal loved Boris's because, well, he seemed like a bit of a laugh. And Boris said, I know what I'm going to do. And somebody said, what, have a second referendum just to check that this is definitely what people want, bearing in mind you're the third Prime Minister in office since this has happened. And Boris said, no, let's have another election. So they did. And Boris won by hiding in the fridge and being a bit of a laugh. But then he was in charge of Brexit. And Boris, just like everybody else, wasn't really sure what Brexit meant. So they came up with meaningless phrases like Brexit means Brexit, which is brilliant in its stupidity, but actually works for any example, any question, ever. Try it. What is the capital of Peru? The capital of Peru is the capital of Peru. This instantaneously made all questions pointless, as we understood everything and nothing at the same time. And over in Brussels, the EU said, really UK, you seem to be struggling with this a bit. Would you like a bit more time just to make sure of everything, to ensure you leave with a good deal? And Boris said, we know you're gay, me, you. No extension. And I'd rather be dead in a ditch than ask for an extension. And he said this while standing in front of a load of policemen, because he wanted to look hard. But then Parliament said, don't be a cunt, get an extension so we can get a proper deal. And Boris was told by the law to get an extension, but he did this without signing the letter, and he crossed his fingers, so it didn't really count. Although it did mean he didn't have to be found dead in a ditch, just looked like he was. So the deal went through, but that was only the deal to get us to the other deal that we would have after leaving. And the EU said, you know, you've only got 10 months to sort this whole thing out. I don't think that would be enough time. And Boris and the Tories said, what do you mean, loads of time? Honestly, 2020 is going to be the year where we get things done. And you said, okay, but if you don't work really hard and pay lots of attention, you're going to end up with no deal, which means leaving on WTO terms. And Boris wasn't sure what no deal or what WTO meant. But he knew that both were preferable to lots of hard work and detail, so he decided to do nothing. About this time, somewhere in Wuhan, a man says, that bat looks tasty. Then lots of people get sick as a horrible, nasty virus started to spread. And the scientists turned around to Boris and said, we've got a disease coming in. We need to quarantine all new arrivals. We need to set up track and trace. And we need to ensure that we isolate the vulnerable and get some personal protective equipment, PPE, in for the doctors and nurses. And Boris said, oh, nurses, oh, saucy. And somebody said, really, what the fuck is wrong with you anyway? If you do nothing, Boris, then up to 500,000 people could die. And upon hearing this, Boris knew exactly what he had to do. Nothing, which he successfully managed for 3 whole weeks. So while other world leaders were locking down countries and putting stringent procedures in place, Boris was busy high-fiving patients that may or may not have had coronavirus, till someone said, 500,000 people is actually a lot of people, so do something. Boris said, I will. And he told people that he would isolate the vulnerable, and he didn't. Then he said everybody would get PPE, and they didn't. Then he said he would do track and trace and quarantine, which is due to happen sometime in June, I believe. A mere 5 months after the virus first hit our shores. And the government said what a great job they had done, keeping the death count down to a mere 60,000 or so, which meant that we had the second highest death rate on the planet, second only to a country that's 4 times our size, with a leader that recommends you drink bleach. When anybody mentioned this, the government said that we had to wait a bit to compare death rates in other countries, as sometimes, well, people come back to life, right? So everybody thought, you know what, let's just get on with it. We know what we have to do. So they did. And it was remarkable. People showed real compassion and caring. They clapped for the brave and selfless NHS and carers once a week, the people putting their lives on the line to save ours, and for a bit, just for a little while, people forgot about the Brexit hate and the division. And people also forgot that we had elected a lazy, incompetent, misogynistic, racist lying clown into the highest political office in the country. But then we found out that Dominic Cummings, the government's chief advisor, the man more responsible for Brexit than any other person, and the man on whose advice we all stayed indoors, had decided not to stay indoors and drove to the other side of the country because he couldn't find a babysitter in a city with 9 million people in. When asked about it, he said he believed he acted within the rules, which he clearly didn't. And then somebody pointed out that he also drove to a castle on his wife's birthday. And he said yes, but he only did that to check his eyesight. This wasn't weaseled out of him. He told reporters that's exactly what he did, leading to the most extraordinary tweet from the chief of police telling people not to drive to test your eyesight. And everybody said, well, duh. Well, everybody, of course, except for Boris, who said, seemed perfectly normal to me. And members of the government, Michael Gove and Matt Hancock, who both said that they'd done that sort of thing before. Although at least Michael Gove had enough self-awareness to laugh about the ridiculousness of what he was saying. And meanwhile, over in Brussels, the EU said, yeah, bye. And if, after all that, you want a clearer and more concise understanding of how Boris and the Tories have handled and are handling Brexit. Let me put it like this. Imagine Boris is one of those magicians, and we, the British public, are the audience. And he's going to show us some magic. So he says, that watch looks valuable. Take it off and hand it to me, please. Which we do with a nervous giggle. And he puts it in a cloth pouch, tying it up, places it on the table, and smashes it with a hammer. Now, fans of this particular magic trick will know that there then follows an uncomfortable pause before the magician finds the undamaged watch from his coat pocket, or somewhere else. But not Boris, because Boris isn't a real magician. Boris simply unties the pouch, empties the contents on the table, and says, ta-da! And about 50% of the population say, what do you mean, ta-da? You just smashed up a really valuable watch. About 30% of the rest of the population are saying, no, don't worry, he's got something up his sleeve. His trick isn't over. He knows what he's doing. And incredibly, about 20% of the population is going, oh, great job, Boris, great trick. This is exactly what we're after. Fantastic. So this is where we are, bang smack in the middle of a pandemic, 6 months away from leaving on a no deal, which would create an international fire sale on British businesses. And at the steering wheel is a man who only taken this far because he wants to check his eyesight. And that's even before I talk about the Russia report, which may or may not show dodgy dealings between Boris and, well, presumably some other people called Boris. So pull up a chair, grab the popcorn and make yourself comfy. See what craziness is going to happen in the UK next. I'm going to be doing a show called The Interesting Times, which starts on Monday. So hit the subscribe and notification bell, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks for watching.